Ms. Atkins.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the questions and the comments. Mr. Howard, as we've gone through this process over the last 3 years, we've always had to focus on something that was the big thing at the time. And right now, of course, it's the long-range property management plans. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around, because I have a feeling I'm going to get the questions, as I have from multiple cities, even though it's not my own. The long-range property management plan. When we started this process, if I remember correctly, some of the conversations with the Pro Tem's office and various folks, as I've been trying to figure this out, there was a point where, and I'm going to go back to the question I asked before because I'm really trying to understand it, and I think I really want to understand it. The compensation agreements were required as part of the compensation plan, and now they're sort of not. There's more of a check the box. The role of the oversight board, was that always part of, as you started this with the long-range property management plans, or is that now? I'm just trying to understand what the expectation is and the requirement is on the compensation plans with the entities as it relates to approval of the property management plans. And I'm sorry I didn't quite understand the response before, but I want to be really clear on that, because I have a feeling we're going to get more questions as you get into all of these. So I want to really understand it.
Yeah, so
what is the requirement?
So the only requirement on the plan itself is that if the sponsoring entity of the former RDA is requesting to retain the property for future development, that they say that they intend to go out and enter into a compensation agreement with the taxing entities. That's all that is required for approval.
If they intend to retain, okay.
If they intend to retain for future development, that they state their intent to reach an agreement with the taxing entities. That is all that is required. They don't need to actually have an agreement executed. And when they go out and do such an agreement, that agreement does not need to come back to finance. It does not need to come back to the oversight board. That is between the sponsoring entities and what we call the ATEs, the affected taxing entities. It's an agreement between those individuals outside of our purview. So they're allowed to retain the property if they reach such an agreement. That agreement can be for free. That agreement can be for $1 million. That agreement can be for $10. I mean, it can be for anything else. It could be for a swap of land. I don't know.
Now, let me just ask, if
we've seen a variety of. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate the dialogue. Is it possible that there would have been an agreement before? I mean, this is winding down, and you're sort of reevaluating, as you move forward. Could there have been agreements in the past on properties that are in the portfolio? Does that make sense to anybody? I mean, I know
if there was always an intent to do something with that property, and that's what those taxing entities expected, and those taxing entities can somehow demonstrate, could convey to the city or to the sponsoring entity that, yeah, we always wanted this to happen with that property. To us, I think that would suffice as an agreement between the taxing entities. I mean, we don't specify how that agreement needs to look or the makeup of that agreement.
Just that there is.
Just that they have a consensus between them.
Okay. One last totally different area, the enforceable obligations piece. So there was a while back where the enforceable obligations that would end up on a ROPS, we had so many coming, well, not we, you were doing the work. Department of Finance had so many coming at you that you were sampling. And so something might be approved on a ROPS, an enforceable obligation, and then as you start to weed down in the next process and the next process, you would find that you would look at it further and realize it was not something you would approve. Are we at a point, we're still having situations, I think, and maybe the city of West Sac might have experience, or the League of Cities, some experience where you're still getting a lot of those denials on enforceable obligations on ROPS. Shouldn't that be less and less and less? And so from your experience, are we still denying enforceable obligations that were approved before, and how much? And maybe from the league, if you have a sense and can tell me how much of a problem is this still, because as we're weeding down and getting through dissolution, we should be seeing less and less of enforceable obligations, I would think, just logically, that are being denied on the ROPS?
No.
Maybe if both of you could respond, I'd appreciate that.
I'll go first.
Sure.
So great question. We are seeing less and less and less. So to answer that, I mean, pretty straightforward. The one thing I point out and I think that's shown by the number of fewer meet and confers that we've had. The last period, the bulk of our meet and confers were really on city RDA loan repayments. Those are now eligible for payment in this upcoming ROPS period, so we should no longer see those disagreements on future ROPS because they will start getting repaid, assuming that entity has their finding of completion. We anticipate that not within this upcoming ROPS period, but the following ROPS period, we'll have reviewed everything on every ROPS that has been listed since the very first ROPS. That's when we will have finally finished every line item. Some agencies are already there. There's some big ones who have a lot of things listed. And like I previously mentioned, we still have some agencies that are listing things for the very first time. For whatever reason, they've chosen not to list all their obligations, even if there was no payment due on a ROP, so we've never seen it until now. I'm not sure why that's the case with those agencies, but that has happened. So it is going down. We were expecting the meet and confers to drop dramatically, primarily because of the loan repayments now getting repaid. We've also put out there some draft agreements related to the expenditure of bond proceeds for people to use, so they can model entering into those agreements so that they can transfer all those bond proceeds to the city and use them for the purposes in which they're issued, without having to list them on future ROPS too, which is going to smooth that process over quite a bit for the cities or I should say the successor agencies. So we do think it's going down. We do think there's going to be a point where we've reviewed everything. But I do want to point out one last thing is some agencies are continuing to list those obligations that we've already objected to. So like I said, as we go through the litigation piece, they're doing it merely because their counsel is telling them to continue to list it until the court case has been resolved, which is fine. We don't have a problem with that. But we deny it again. They have to meet and confer on it again, and they're just exhausting their administrative process before an ultimate decision at the court level. I understand that, but that's always.
And I get that one.
Yeah.
I think I'm more. I think I was more. I get what you're saying on that piece of it, and I think I was more referring to the ones where they've been approved and then later get rejected and how. Okay.
Yeah. So we obviously, when we don't review something, we always say that we don't object to it. Doesn't mean we necessarily reviewed it for approval. As mentioned, you can get a final and conclusive to where we'll never object to it in the future. And I'm actually very surprised that we don't get more of those requests in. I don't know why agencies don't choose to do that, but they don't.
So if you want to respond, and then we're going to go to public comment.
The League is continuing to hear that cities are having ROPS enforceable obligations denied that have been listed on previous ROPS. I think just as organically, those have be less and less as they go through the process. It seems like what DOF is doing when it approves a ROPS is something along the lines of what engineers do when they sign off on plans, where they say no exceptions taken. That doesn't mean that everything's perfect, but but there, as far as they can tell, it meets the requirements of code. And so this no exceptions taken type of approval does leave open that question as to, down the road, okay, are you going to object to it? That gets to the issue of certainty. I'm glad to hear that DOF has a timeline to ensure that all ROPS items, all enforceable obligations have been reviewed. So at that point, we'll get past this, and it'll be on the table, and either you got the approval or denial, and then for cities, they need to decide what to do with those items that were denied. But the uncertainty of not knowing whether your approved ROPS includes all the items on it or selected items is an area of concern, and particularly not knowing that at some point in the future you could get the rug pulled out from under you and have DOF say we're not approving that enforceable obligation. So to the extent that DOF can accelerate the review of enforceable obligations to get all that out on the table so that there's no uncertainty, even if the cities don't like what DOF determines, at least they know where they stand and they can decide what to do at that point.
Go ahead.
I was
You
just
may
going to
comment.
add that, yeah, we had a practical example of that recently where our ROPS is now down to just a few items. We've pretty much been through everything that either got denied or has been satisfied. But we did have an item that's been on there from the start that was randomly, we thought randomly rejected. So it turns out, I think it was either a new reviewer or it maybe hadn't been sampled before. So we got through that process, but it did seem a little random. So I think it's encouraging to hear that you can make those final rulings. I suspect maybe the reason people haven't asked for many of those is because they're potentially fearful of what the outcome might be. But I think on the ones, at least in our case, we might be taking advantage of that because it's really down to bond payments and old development agreements. So, yeah.
All right, thank you. So public comment, we have a microphone right up here, and we'll ask you to, if you can, keep it to 2 minutes. 3 max.
Thank you, Chair Skinner. Members, my name is Dave Walrath. I'm representing Small School Districts Association and the Lucia Mara Unified School District. We haven't been talking about public schools, but they also are affected by redevelopment wind down. Affected in a way different than other local entities. Because when our pass-through money is changed from being outside of operational dedicated to facilities, and after wind down it becomes operational offsetting state aid, the effect is we have an absolute cut. We have funds that were dedicated for facilities outside of operational that now have to be covered by reallocating our operational funds. Cities, counties, and special districts receive the redevelopment pass-through as additional new money in wind down. For us, it's not additional new money. We hope that during this process of looking at redevelopment, looking at where we are, that we'll be able to address this to accomplish the goal that we thought was the goal, to keep schools held harmless. That has not been the effect, and that is not how Department of Finance is interpreting the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrea Ball on behalf of the California School Boards Association. I just want to echo what Mr. Walrath said and to let you know that we've heard from members in different parts of the state, large districts, small districts, about that same issue at the termination of the pass-through agreements. So I encourage you to look at that issue, and we can provide more information as you go along. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, Jason Gonsalves. We represent 50-plus cities throughout the state. I wanted to first apologize to Justin and his team because by my math, I guess I'm guilty for about 10 to 15% of the meet and confers and a large portion of the 90 emails per day. The process has improved. What DOF has said, we have been able to get to yes a number of times, and it has been a fruitful process. We don't always get there. And to Mr. Jones Sawyer and the committee's point, looking forward, and also the schools for that matter, looking forward, how do we proceed? The IFD recommendation is in the staff analysis, and the LAO mentioned at the outset of redevelopment elimination, returning the property tax to local governments and taxing entities on a system that was devised in the mid-1970s does not reflect most of your districts. 200 or so cities get 10% or less share of the property tax. And then when you go to an IFD, the premise is you're going to sit down with, in some cases, 26 taxing entities and get them to voluntarily participate in an infrastructure plan. Well, now they're taking money that is general fund money that can be used for salaries and other purposes and having to set that aside. I would imagine a fire district is not really inclined to do so. So if you're the local agency and you're getting 7% share of the property tax, again, moving forward, and you go and you grow your assessed valuation, should the IFD law say that if the other taxing entities don't participate, you get a larger share at the back end of the growth that you will be generating? So there's a number of nuances. I know we're limited in time, but again, I want to thank the Department of Finance as well as your legislative staff, and apologize for perhaps the 50-plus meet and confers. It has been a struggle, but DOF is unwinding 40-year marriages between cities and agencies, and they're doing 500 of them. Not a real enviable position, but we'll continue to forge ahead and work with the committee on how we move. How we move forward. Thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Downs with Myers Nave. I also represent a number of redevelopment agencies throughout the state. And I really appreciate the fact that everyone says that this is winding down quickly, but I thought it might be helpful to give a couple of real-life situations that are happening right now that are very frustrating at the local level. I have one client who has had a long-range property management plan that they sent over a year ago to the Department of Finance. And after finally inquiring last week, they were told that they couldn't get their long-range property management plan approved until their controller audit was completed. Now, the controller finished his review last July, and they had their closeout last July, but they still have not, this client still has not gotten a draft controller's audit report or a final controller audit report. So while I'm hearing here that everything's working really smoothly, that's not how the local agencies are feeling at this point. This same agency also sent a final inconclusive about a year ago, and they still have not heard anything back on that. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Right, so if that's the conclusion of public comment, I wanted to make some wrap-up comments and then, of course, invite those other members still on the dais to also. So I want to thank you all for participating, both those in the audience and our panel members. And some of the conclusionary notes that I made is that it seems that we probably in early May should either have another oversight hearing, or if not a full hearing, at least ask Department of Finance and the Controller to provide us some status report on where we are at the approval of the long-range property management plans. And I add Controller only because we know that in some cases a Controller's action is necessary in addition to the Department of Finance's action. So we want to see if those things are happening in sync and get a little sense of what's happening. And then additionally, this process for the ROPs and whether there should be an annual one to provide some of the certainty that's been brought up by both panelists and comments from the assembly members on the dais. Those of you on the dais, did you want to make any other comment or looking forward to any? Go ahead, Ms. Atkins.
You know, I apologize. I feel like I've taken up a lot of the time.
No worries.
But
chairing you.
but
I didn't point out you do chair our Assembly Task Force on this question, so it's appropriate. You've been very involved in it.
Well, thank you. So with that in mind, I think we still have a ways to go. Obviously, we have these hearings for the point to check in and kind of take stock of where we are and make sure we've got Department of Finance, the legislators, the Controller's Office, public involved in this process, and so that we're holding each other accountable. I mean, since we are dissolving redevelopment agencies, we need to make sure that we're on task and doing it and getting the job done in as best a way as possible. So I would appreciate that we continue and that this subcommittee, because this is the proper venue, continue to keep this on the schedule to do. And I would appreciate certainly hearing from Department of Finance, you know, continued ways that we can work together to make this a better and smoother proposition going forward, because none of us really intended to be here, as, you know, we thought it would play out differently. I do want to say and particularly from the public, when you give examples of situations where something is not working well, you know, we have a process where we try to help move that stuff along if there are questions. So I hope you will contact certainly my staff. Diane is here, Katie is here. I think everybody involved in this redevelopment unwinding knows who they are and understands that we are working with Department of Finance to try to do this in the best way possible. So I think it's important. This has been very complicated in terms of all the boxes that need to be checked, all the people, and certainly, we're going to keep working on it, and we'll be assessing the need for further legislation, which is why, in our conversations, we hope that they continue to go smoothly, but we'll do what we need to do so that not only we feel like it's going well and we have in statute what we need to have, but that we're also, Department of Finance needs issues in statute so they can follow the law as it is written and being consistent and fair across the board to the entities as they unwind. So we're going to continue to do this. The quicker we get through this, the more we can look at alternatives, I think. The more that the governor will be willing to consider options and alternatives or economic development tools. And so I just appreciate the time you've given to this, Madam Chair, and your staff involvement as well.
Thank you. And we will also probably have, if the court cases have conclusions over the course of this year prior to the end of legislative session, there may be something as a result of those that requires some corrective action too. So we'll have to monitor all of it. And appreciate again that you came and appreciate the participation of the members, and we will continue to monitor and interact. So thank you.